بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي أنزل على عبده الكتاب ولم يجعل له عوجا. الحمد لله الواحد الأحد الصمد الذي لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. We begin with the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We acknowledge that all praise and thanks belong to Him alone. Therefore we seek His guidance, we seek His assistance, we seek His forgiveness, we seek His love and His nearness. I put our complete trust and reliance in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. I bear witness that there is none worthy of serving, that there is none worthy of observing, that there is none worthy of worshipping except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I bear witness that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is the last and final messenger. As we continue with our series on Qasas al-Quran, the Quranic stories and specifically the lessons and reflections that we can derive from the stories that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala narrates to us in the Quran al-Kareem, we will continue and conclude today with the discussion of Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam. In our previous khutbah, we mentioned how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had commanded Sayyidina Nuh to go and build the ark. وَاصْنَعِ الْفُلْكَ بِأَعْيُنِنَا, that build the ark under our watch and under our command and revelation. And Sayyidina, as the scholars of Tafsir mentioned, that Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam was the first human being in history to build an ark and a ship. And during the era in which Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam was building and constructing the ark and the ship on the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he faced constant criticism. كُلَّمَا مَرَّ عَلَيْهِ مَلَأٌ مِّن قَوْمِهِ سَخِرُوا مِنْهُ. Every time a group of people walked past and they saw that he was building this ark and this ship in a region where there was no water, they made fun of him, they mocked at him, and they laughed at him. And then came the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes this in multiple places in the Quran al-Kareem. In Surah Hud, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, حَتَّى إِذَا جَاءَ أَمْرُنَا وَفَارَتَّ النُّورِ, that they criticized him until the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came. وَفَارَتَّ النُّورِ, and it overflowed. قُلْ نَحْمِلْ فِيهَا مِنْ كُلٍّ زَوْجَيْنِ اثْنَيْنِ وَأَهْلَكَ إِلَّا مَنْ سَبَقَ عَلَيْهِ الْقَوْلُ وَمَنْ آمَنَ. And then in Surah Mu'minun, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْهِ أَنِ اصْنَعِ الْفُلْكَ بِأَعْيُنِنَا وَوَحْيِنَا, that we commanded him to build the ark and the ship under our watch and our command. فَإِذَا جَاءَ أَمْرُنَا, and then when our command came, وَفَارَتَّ النُّورِ, and the oven overflowed. وَفَارَتَّ النُّورِ, this term وَفَارَتَّ النُّورِ, we'll talk about it. فَاسْلُكْ فِيهَا مِنْ كُلٍّ زَوْجَيْنِ اثْنَيْنِ وَأَهْلَكَ إِلَّا مَنْ سَبَقَ عَلَيْهِ الْقَوْلُ مِنْهُمْ وَلَا تُخَاطِبْنِي فِي الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا إِنَّهُمْ مُغْرَقُونَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that He commanded Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam to build the ark and the ship until His command came. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam a sign that will indicate when he and his followers need to embark on the ark and the ship. And that was وَفَارَتَّ النُّورِ. Now what's interesting is the word فَارَتَّ النُّورِ literally means when the oven overflows. And the scholars of Tafsir gave three definitions or three explanations for this. Number one is that literally, this is a minority opinion, that literally water will overflow out of a certain oven. Number two, this was a sign that when water starts to flow on the earth, as when the water starts to flow from the earth. And the third is that it is a metaphor that when the flood has reached its peak, Nonetheless, they all agree that this was a term used to tell Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam that when the situation becomes severe, when the flood reaches a peak wherein you have no other choice but to embark, this is the time when you should embark. And then he tells Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam of who needs to embark onto the ship with him. قُلْ نَحْمِلْ فِيهَا مِنْ كُلٍّ زَوْجَيْنِ اثْنَيْنِ وَأَهْلَكَ إِلَّا مَنْ سَبَقَ عَلَيْهِ الْقَوْلُ وَمَنْ آمَنَ. He is told that 3 people should follow him. Number 1 are the believers of the family of Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam. Number 2, believers from outside the family of Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam. And number 3, pairs of each type of animals. Now we see the continuous and the sustained mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam, he is commanded that he himself, the believers in his family, and also the other believers should embark on the ship with him. And along with that, pairs of each animal. Now what is the wisdom behind Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam that they need to bring the pairs of animals? It is to show that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after they see what they see from the floods, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will still look after their needs. Their needs, whether the animals that they need for their survival and their sustenance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be able to create the animals from scratch. But this is an added layer of comfort to Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam, that your sustenance and your well-being and the well-being of the followers is taken care of. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentioned these 3 categories. Sayyidina Nuh and the believers in his family, the believers outside his family, and pairs of animals, he needs to take them. And now the flood starts. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a very scary image in the Quran al-Kareem to describe to us the flood of Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam's era. He said, فَدَعَا رَبَّهُ أَنِّي مَغْلُوبٌ فَانْتَصِرْ. He made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I am overpowered, so help. فَفَتَحْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ أَبْوَابَ السَّمَاءِ بِمَاءٍ مُنْهَمِرٍ. When the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came, فَفَتَحْنَا أَبْوَابَ السَّمَاءِ, we opened the doors from the heavens, بِمَاءٍ مُنْهَمِرٍ, from the sky, with water that is pouring down. So first the water started to pour down from the skies. وَفَجَّرْنَا الْأَرْضَ عُيُونًا. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused the earth to burst into springs. فَالْتَقَى الْمَاءُ عَلَىٰ أَمْرٍ قَدْ قُدِرٍ. And the waters met. The waters from the skies and the water that's coming out from the earth, they met for the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This was what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had warned about. وَحَمَلْنَاهُ عَلَىٰ ذَاتِ أَلْوَاحٍ وَدُسُرٍ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, we carried him on the thing that was made of planks and nails. We see a few things, a few reflections from these verses. Number 1, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just the imagery that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described. وَفَجَّرْنَا الْأَرْضَ عُيُونًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, we caused the earth to break into springs. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not say we just opened up some springs here and there, but the words describe that it was as though from everywhere water was gushing out from beneath. And then we see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows how it started. So the water started to come. The imagery is scary. The water's coming from the sky. The water's coming out from the bottom. And then Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam is commanded to say, وَقَالَ ارْكَبُوا فِيهَا بِسْمِ اللَّهِ مَجْرِيهَا وَمُرْسَاهَا إِنَّ رَبِّي لَغَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. And Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam was commanded to say, and he said that embark onto this ark and this ship in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, مَجْرِيهَا وَمُرْسَاهَا, the one who will allow it to sail and the one who will allow it to dock. Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam, with his followers, he tells them that embark onto this ship and this ark. Take the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. the name of that Allah who not only will allow it to sail and protect you, but also He will dock it when the time is correct. Inna Rabbi la ghafurur rahim. Verily my Lord is Ghafur. He is forgiving and He's also the most merciful. And so the water starts to gush. And we see the verses mention that the gates of the water opened from the sky. The water started to come. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala further describes the fear and the level of water that had just the peak of the flood. وَهِيَ تَجْرِي بِهِمْ فِي مَوْجٍ كَالْجِبَالِ. And it sailed with them through waves as high as mountains. The imagery, we think sometimes, may Allah protect us, we see these scary waves which are sometimes 20, 30, 40 feet, and they are very scary. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just showing us what happened at that time. Is the waves were as high as mountains. And this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is a point of reflection. Think about the ships today, with all of the advancements and the circumstances, waves like mountains, downpour, endless downpour from the sky, non-stop water that's coming up from the earth, fierce winds. The best ships of today, it will be difficult for them to withstand this. The question arises that Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam, he built this ship. How did it survive? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes that ذَاتِ أَلْوَاحٍ وَدُسُرٍ, that the ship that he had made was planks and it was nails. It was wood and it was human craftsmanship, and it was something that he did for the first time. The true protector is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes that it was Him who carried Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam and his followers, and He protected them. The verse of the Quran al-Kareem, فَفَتَحْنَا أَبْوَابَ السَّمَاءِ بِمَاءٍ مُنْهَمِرٍ وَفَجَّرْنَا الْأَرْضَ عُيُونًا فَالْتَقَى الْمَاءُ عَلَى أَمْرٍ قَدْ قُدِرٍ. He describes the water coming down from the skies, the water coming up from the ground, and the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the warning that He had warned about, it came into fruition. وَحَمَلْنَاهُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that we carried them. We carried them, and the means was the ship that was built with planks and nails. But it was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who protected. In this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala declares to us and reminds us that He is the one who carried Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam. He guided him and He protected him during the flood. And the lesson for us is during our trials, our calamities, our difficulties, it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who will lift us up. It is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who will provide for us. It is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who will support us. We should not rely on merely the material things of this world. We need to rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we see Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wassalam, he trusted Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That he built this ark, he trusted Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَاسْتَجْرِي بِأَعْيُنِنَا. It flowed under our command and our watch. So he built it under the command and the watch of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it sailed under the command and the ark of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, under the protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, we can imagine that this is a time where Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam, he has some ease. 950 years of difficult da'wah. Another, as he mentioned previously, the time where he was building the ark was also a very difficult and a very hard time. And now there is some moments where Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam can relax. And Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam can take some comfort. But what happens is, as the ark and the ship starts to sail, Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam sees one of his sons. And Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam, he sees his son is not on the ship. The scholars mention either he was a hypocrite or a disbeliever, but Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam was not aware of his hypocrisy and his disbelief. And he sees his son, the ark and the ship starts to move, and he is not on board. And he says, وَنَادَى نُوحٌ ابْنَهُ وَكَانَ فِي مَعْزِلٍ وَنَادَى نُوحٌ ابْنَهُ. And Nuh alayhi salatu wassalam, he calls out to his son, وَكَانَ فِي مَعْزِلٍ, and he was apart. And وَكَانَ فِي مَعْزِلٍ, he was apart, meaning either he was physically away from the ship, or he was apart in belief. His belief, he was from amongst the disbelievers. He was distant from Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam in this regard. So Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam, we see that in a moment where he could have some relax and some comfort of safety, another trial arises for him. And that is the well-being and the protection of his son, who was not on the ark. And he very kindly, in very beautiful words says, يَا بُنَيَّ ارْكَبْ مَعَنَا وَلَا تَكُمْ مَعَ الْكَافِرِينَ. O my beloved son, embark onto the ship with us. وَلَا تَكُمْ مَعَ الْكَافِرِينَ. Don't be amongst the disbelievers. And we see the words in this critical and this crucial moment. The words that Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam said, he didn't say, وَلَا تَكُمْ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. Don't be from the disbelievers. Don't even be ma'al kafirin, don't even be close to them. And he is giving this instinct to his son, the son of Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam, that you saw my message, you were raised on the teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and my teachings, the teachings of Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam. You know what is right. At the time of salvation, don't be from amongst those who will be destroyed. وَلَا تَكُمْ مَعَ الْكَافِرِينَ. And then the son of Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam, in his youthful pride, he did not recognize the wisdom of his father Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam. And he says, سَآوِي إِلَى جَبَلٍ يَعْصِمُنِي مِنَ الْمَاءِ. He says that I will take refuge on a mountain which will protect me from the water. He thought that he could escape through natural means. He thought that materialism would save him from the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam reminds him, لا عاصم اليوم من أمر الله إلا من رحم. Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam, he tried to warn him. And his son went and took the material means. He said, لا عاصم اليوم من أمر الله. There is no protector today from the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala إِلَّا مَنْ رَحِمْ, except the one who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showers His mercy upon. So Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam, he's warning him that only those who believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and attract the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be protected. And Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam is requesting his son to follow the believers and embark on the ark. And this is happening. And we can just imagine the emotions of Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam. And while he's talking to him, and you can see that the water is coming up. وَحَالَ بَيْنَهُمَا الْمَوْجُ فَكَانَ مِنَ الْمُغْرَقِينَ. At that point, while he's talking to him, he's begging him, وَحَالَ بَيْنَهُ الْمَوْجُ. The wave becomes a barrier between them, and he becomes from amongst those who were drowned. So you see the test of Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam. The ark sailed, Bismillahi majriha wa mursaha, with the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who sailed it, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was the one who would dock it. And eventually the time came that disbelief, kufr, stubbornness, the disbelievers, all of it came to an end. All of those who disbelieved, all of them were amongst the mughraqeen, and those who were drowned. And then came the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَقِيلَ يَا أَرْضُ ابْلَعِي مَاءَكَ وَيَا سَمَاءُ أَقْلِعِي. And it was said, O earth, swallow up your water, and sky, withhold your water. So the command came for the flood to stop. And we see, this verse shows us the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it was said, the verse doesn't say, and who said it. It is known that the doer is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The true command is of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala whose command matters. And this is what the Quran al-Kareem says, وَقِيلَ يَا أَرْضُ ابْلَعِي مَاءَكِ وَيَا سَمَاءُ أَقْلِعِي. And it was said, that, oh, earth, capture all of the water, and the sky, hold on to the rain and the water, stop the rain. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَغِيدَ الْمَاءِ, all of the water was subdued. وَقُضِيَ الْأَمْرِ, and the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was fulfilled. The warning that He had warned about came to pass. وَاسْتَوَتْ عَلَى الْجُودِي, and the ark and the ship, it docked on Mount Judi. وَقِيلَ بُعْدًا لِلْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ, and the announcement was made, away from the wrongdoing people, away with the wrongdoing people. And we see Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam, he's protected, his followers are protected, but he still had concern for the fate of his son. And he made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَنَادَى نُوحٌ رَبَّهُ فَقَالَ رَبِّ إِنَّ ابْنِي مِنْ أَهْلِهِ. Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam called on to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, verily my son was from my family. Either he did not know that his son was a hypocrite and a disbeliever, or he felt that the opportunity for asking for his protection was still there. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers him. And this gives us a principle that it is deeds that define identity. It is deeds that define identity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, قَالَ يَا نُوحْ إِنَّهُ لَيْسَ مِنْ أَهْلِكَ إِنَّهُ عَمَلٌ غَيْرُ صَالِحٍ. O Nuh, indeed he is not of your family. Indeed it is an unrighteous deed. And Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam, understanding that he